Hey everyone, the Saipan Sailor here. I'm going to tell you a story today. It'll be in several segments because it's a long one, and probably the most dramatic series of events that took place in my entire 4 decades in the Merchant Marine. So if you like a good sea story, stick around. Place. Before I get started, I want to apologize for my whistling. I have an upper plate. Uh, Never wanted to get implants, but this is the way I talk. So get used to it. I want to start out in the very beginning. In the year 1975, when I was awakened, maybe 4:30 in the morning, by the school staff in this training, maritime training school that I was in. I went through a 3 month training program. A place called Piney Point. And for those of you who are familiar with the place, I was in class number 181. My bags were packed that morning. They put me in a van and they drove me out to Dooley's Airport, Washington, D.C. They gave me my flight ticket to Tampa, Florida, my shipping card, and the address at the pier where the ship was. So when I got to Tampa, took a cab down to the pier. I got out of the cab, and what I was looking at were two ships. One tied up to the pier. The other ship that I was supposed to join was tied up abreast of that one. And what I mean by abreast is that it's parallel parked, tied up right next to it. Now, the ship I was supposed to get on was called the SS Potomac. The ship I was supposed to climb over to get to that one was called the Aguila. So I climbed over the Aguila, got on board the Potomac. We sailed off the next day, and there I was in the autumn of 1975, 16 years old, making my first journey. Now I want to fast forward 11 years later, because little did I know that the ship I had to climb over, the Aguila, I was to sail on her in 1986 out of Los Angeles, California. Only at that time, she was renamed the OMI Yukon. And OMI were initials, I believe, stood for Ogden Marine Incorporated. Shipping companies back then changed names all the time. They changed ships' names all the time. The same people, same ships, but that's how they operated. So myself and another fella, we both took jobs on that ship. Our jobs were unlicensed engine room watchstanders. Pretty much the engineer's gopher, what we were. And off we went. Now that ship, that was an oil tanker, okay? It was an old oil tanker. And it was a real funky design, which I won't go into very much. But it was on what I called the six-pack run. And it would go to Alaska, load up with oil, and then hit half a dozen ports down the California coast. And that's what we did for a couple of months. I don't really remember how long I stayed on that ship. It wasn't that long, maybe two months at best. But that ship had a lot of problems. being as old as it was. One of the problems it had was one of the fuel tanks had a crack in the tank. It was on the inboard side of the tank, which was on the engine room side. And the oil would leak out of the crack, and we were always cleaning it up. Now, the company let it go for years and years. Finally, the crew was writing letters to the union, and the union, I guess, started talking to the Coast Guard about it. Finally, the Coast Guard made them repair it. So, when we got on that ship, we had heard immediately that it was bound for the shipyard eventually. So, after a few runs up and down the California coast, we started headed for Hawaii. Now, our jobs we were watchstanders, okay? And the watches, we call them dog watches or sea watches, and they went between 8 and 12, 12 and 4, and between 4 and 8. My watch was 4 to 8, and I was on watch with the first assistant engineer. He was the guy that was in charge of the whole engine room. We all worked under the chief engineer, but he was the top dog down below, and I was on watch with him. We never did make it to the shipyard, and I'm going to tell you in the next episode what happened in Hawaii. We were going up to Hawaii to take on some stores, to take on fuel, and maybe a crew change if anyone wanted to quit, okay? And we all got a day off there, which were 2 consecutive watches, which added up to about 24 hours. Once we left the ship, we didn't have to be back for a day. And where we were going to tie up was in Barbers Point. Now, when we got there, they were having trouble tying up to the buoys. You couldn't just anchor, you have to tie up to something before a fuel barge comes out to tie up to the ship. The ship needs to be stable and not moving around on the anchor. So it was stormy weather, and they had to wait a day. Now, one of my buddies, the guy that was with me when I took the job, and he took the other job that was available, I made a deal with him to stand one of my watches. And I forgot what my end of the deal was, but he said, sure. And he stood my watch. So as soon as we got in, I went ashore in Honolulu. So, like I said, I'm going to end this segment, and stay tuned for part 2. These segments are only going to be about 10 minutes because I don't want to bore you to death, okay? Nobody's going to want to watch a 40 or 50-minute long video. But 10 minutes, I figured anybody can take a quick 10-minute break and watch it. So, stay tuned. This is the Saipan Sailor, and it was a pleasure to meet you.